almost everybody here. Actually, I introduced this symposium this morning and certainly chaired one of the sessions. She's a DPhil candidate here at the University of Oxford and is supervised by Dan Goomley, of which more anon. She is a co-convener of the Nordic Network, and her thesis is on Nordic theatre at the turn of the century. She has presented on a variety of topics, including Sibelius's theatre music and music for August Strindberg's plays, and will be presenting a radio show on Nordic Theatre for Resonance FM in 2016.
Yeah,
very exciting. Welcome.
Yeah. Right, so Scaramouche. This does actually follow on from Kirsten's paper, but more to do with gender representation than infanticide. There is no infanticide, as far as I'm aware, in this particular pantomime. Well, I don't know, maybe it's that. So Sibelius's only pantomime, Scaramouche, it has a particularly thorny genesis. Its composition was plagued by misunderstandings, disagreements, and accusations of plagiarism. When Sibelius received a commission to write music for the play in 1912, he accepted enthusiastically, thinking he could only be required to compose 1 or 2 dances. By the following year, as he came to complete his work on the score, he realised that the contract did not cover just a couple of dances, but he was required to a full score to accompany the entire pantomime. Sibelius was angry enough about this revelation to write in his diary, "I've completely ruined things for myself by signing the Scaramouche contract. Was in such a temper about it today that I've smashed the telephone." Besides this, Sibelius had previously accused the author, the Dane Paul Knudsen, of plagiarising Arthur Schnitzler's play The Belle of Perrette, and had expressed discontent with the inclusion of dialogue in what he felt was a pantomime. There are a lot of very angry letters to his publisher, which were quite entertaining. But despite all of this, Sibelius persevered with the score, and he eventually produced over an hour of music for the drama. Its length alone makes it one of his most significant dramatic scores, to say nothing of the resemblances that it bears to the sound worlds of both the Second and Fifth Symphonies. And yet, like his incidental music, it remains overlooked in the scholarship on the composer. So in this paper, I'll attempt to address this, first placing Scaramouche in the wider context of turn of the century preoccupations with physicality in the theatre, counterbalancing concerns about the veracity of language. And I'll then look at its more personal meaning for Sibelius, concerned as it is with the mystical power of art and fragile male subjectivities. So who then, and indeed what, is Scaramouche? As far as genre is concerned, it is somewhere between a ballet, a pantomime, and a melodrama. The drama is mainly danced and mimed, but there are short lines of dialogue, and the entirety is underscored, making it practically impossible to place in any one category. And this ambiguity caused consternation for Sibelius, who was concerned with the practicalities of how the piece would be realised on stage, and it also proved problematic for reviewers who engaged in a very lively debate as to how the drama should be categorised. There are a lot of feature pieces and to and fro in the Swedish press. This was obviously an aesthetic problem that really was taken up with greater plot and vigour. The plot revolves around a love triangle between Blondelaine, a dancer, her lover Leylon, and Scaramouche, a viola player. At the start, Blondelaine and Leylon are hosting a party, and when Blondelaine is invited to dance, Scaramouche and his 2 musical companions enter and offer to play. As Scaramouche plays, Blondelaine begins to dance uncontrollably. His music has some kind of inexplicable power over her. Worried for her safety, Leylon banishes Scaramouche, but Blondelaine follows him when he leaves the house, entranced by his viola playing. Blondelaine shortly returns to her lover, full of remorse, and Leylon forgives her. Scaramouche returns to collect Blondelaine, but she stabs him and hides his body. She descends into a frenzied anxiety, and when Leylon discovers the body, Blondelaine dances herself to death. This story then feeds into established tropes of turn-of-the-century drama and ballet. Amongst others, the girl who dances herself to death appears in the better-known Rite of Spring, premiered in 1913, Frank Wedekin's pantomime, The Empress of Newfoundland, and Arthur Schnitzler's play, The Belle of Perrette, the Symposium, which on the bottom right. This is the play that caused Sibelius to accuse Knudsen of plagiarism. The storylines are practically identical. But why this fascination with the self-destructive woman? I will suggest reasons for Blondelaine's specific demise in the second half of this paper, but the uncontrollable female body forms part of a larger societal discourse at the time about gender identity and the relationship between the intellectual and physical. An often-cited aspect of 20th century modernity is a concern about the veracity of language, a paradigmatic case being Hugo von Hofmannsthal's 1902 Lord Chandos letter. noted, the dethroning of language had wide ramifications for the verbal arts. In the drama, gesture and silence were given equal billing with dialogue. Pantomime, ballet, and gestural theatre flourished as artists looked for both alternatives and complements to the written word. This is contemporaneous with the rise of interest in physical education programs, which became integral school curricula. The body was becoming a centre of attention, both on and off the stage. Accompanying this intense focus on the bodily, however, was a fear of the mind, and thus rationality, being overpowered and overtaken by physical, often sexual impulses. The controlled, medically fit body, as demonstrated here, in the new figure, this is the first ever career bodybuilder, the German-born Eugene Sunder, and I was intrigued to find out that Arthur Conan Doyle was one of the judges of the first ever bodybuilding contest, which was held in London and organised by this fine gentleman here. So there we go, it's your trivia for the day. So this was deemed extremely desirable, but the uncontrollable, deformed, or otherwise unruly body was a source of anxiety. Ideas about sexuality and gender identity are absolutely central to this. Otto Weininger's phenomenally popular treatise Sex and Character, published in 1903, a wonderfully acerbic piece, argues that women were nothing but empty sexual vessels. He has a wonderful quote: "The longer the hair, the smaller the brain." Yeah. Her existence, Weininger states, is always and completely sexual. Women's existence revolves entirely around her sexual life. And it is this sexually aggressive view of women that we see in Wedekin's aforementioned Empress of Newfoundland. In this pantomime, the Empress searches for a man able to satisfy her, eventually alighting upon a bodybuilder, who she pushes to complete ever more impossible displays of strength. No matter how much he lifts to prove his masculinity, nothing can be enough to satisfy her. And in a fit of lust, she dances herself to death, eventually strangling herself with her own hair. The sexual connotations of this are patently obvious. The Empress brings about her own demise through her insatiable sex drive. Dances were increasingly incorporated into plays to signify a loss of constraint. For example, Ibsen's Doll's House, where the protagonist dances a tarantella before leaving her husband. But in this case, constraint moves into a complete loss of control. The sexually motivated, irrational body overrides the rational mind. Although undoubtedly in dialogue with these views, Scaramouche, I think, seems to present a slightly different perspective. Blondelaine does lose control of her body, but the gender identities at play in Scaramouche are not as crudely diametrically opposed as they are in the Empress of Newfoundland, say. Blondelaine is surrounded by men who are in some way sexually inadequate and who are in some way feminized, quite different to Wedekin's bodybuilder. Her death does ultimately stem from her sexual desires, but the role of art, and music specifically, plays an integral role in her downfall. I'll be offering a psychoanalytic reading, drawing on literature by Melanie Klein, in order to explain both Blondelaine's demise and Sibelius' engagement with the subject matter. Sibelius was right to be concerned about the practicalities of staging Scaramouche, and did not receive its premiere until 1922 in Copenhagen, as it was considered too problematic to stage. 2 years later, it was performed at the Royal Opera in Stockholm, directed by Johannes Poulsen, with designs by Kai Nielsen, as we can see here. And Kai Nielsen is better known for his book illustrations, and he later designed costumes for the Sibelius' Tempest music. So he covers Scaramouche's costume, as you can see here, in these symbols and geometric designs, giving him talismans hanging from his belt. So visually, Scaramouche is presented as something like a shaman, reinforcing the sense that, in one reviewer's words, the music adds a cosmic power. It is not Scaramouche the man who controls Blondelaine, but the music that he conjures forth. For the reviewers, this distinction was absolutely vital. For Knutson's Scaramouche is a hunchbacked dwarf, transformed from the commedia dell'arte Don Juan figure from whom he inherits his name. One writer stated emphatically that Scaramouche violates her will through music, and that it is the dancer who follows the music, not the woman the hunchback. Unfortunately, I don't have the space here to fully explore the ramifications of this representation from the perspective of disability studies, say, feeding as it does to what Sherry Lee has identified as a trend within turn-of-the-century art. She notes that the figure of the little hunchback is part of a wider cultural interest of the time in the theme of the subject who is marked or stigmatized by inner trauma as much as by any externally evident physical affliction or impairment. In this production in particular, He also bears striking resemblance to contemporaneous Jewish stereotypes, which again, unfortunately, I can't discuss now. It will have to suffice for the present purposes to establish that Scaramouche represents a form of masculinity that is in some way other. Not only is he disfigured, but he is a physically disfigured character within a balletic pantomime. His alterity is only emphasized in a medium where expression is almost entirely dependent on physical prowess. Lelah also is described as a very slender, somewhat decadent young man. Surrounded by silks and velvets, he epitomizes the image of the fin de siècle dandy. This is a stereotype characterized, as Michael Curie puts it, by androgyny and an aristocratic demeanor that shun vulgarity and demonstrations of passion. Neither present a polar opposite to Blondelaine's feminine persona. There is no 20th century masculine ideal present here. Indeed, one reviewer went so far as to comment that if there is something missing in Knudson's composition, it is precisely heroism and masculinity. Scaramouche is feminine and effeminate. So at this point, we need to look a little closer at the exact relationships between the characters involved. From the outset, Lelah is unable to engage with Blondelaine on that which is most important to her, namely dance. He refuses to dance with her, even when pressed by both his friends and by Blondelaine. His lack of interaction on this serves immediately as a point of difference from Blondelaine, instigating a point of inadequacy from the start. This distance between the two of them is reflected in Sibelius' setting. The pantomime opens on an open third in the strings, F sharp to A natural, underlaid by the inner timpani. But the lack of the fifth immediately sets up a duality. The third could belong to D major or to F sharp minor, and this is completely ignored by the flute melody, which we'll hear in a second, which blithely continues in A major, seemingly either oblivious to or refusing to acknowledge the tension which began. The accompaniment moves to A major by bar 3, and from this point on, the key of A, whether in major or minor, is the predominant key center until Scaramouche enters. The music that Blondelaine and Lelah share is mundane, it's repetitive, and seems to function at a deliberately superficial level. And I'll bring it up now so we can hear quite how different it is with the music. Yeah, I'm afraid, for some reason, I don't know why this happens, but you're going to have a beautiful picture of my dog. Please imagine it is Scaramouche. This is the opening. So Blondelaine and Scaramouche, however, are intimately connected through his ability to share in the dance with her through his viola playing. Their connection is decidedly sexual, and Scaramouche's music represents an unbridled sexuality that both captivates and terrifies Blondelaine. She can hide or ignore her desires that potentially discomfort her through Lelah refusing to engage in this aspect with her. But they are inescapably embodied in Scaramouche. Although Lelah calls for a bolero to be played, a dance with sexual connotations, like Ravel's bolero, for example, especially following on from the social minuet with which the pantomime opens, Blondelaine dances by herself and is placed into the feminine subject position of the spectacle, as she dances for the entertainment of the guests. Sibelius' setting is initially light-hearted and in the opening key of A major, effectively tempering the sexual tension of the dance, not Blondelaine's position within it. When Scaramouche plays, however, the music changes entirely. The flute melody, associated with Blondelaine, begins to adopt motives introduced by Scaramouche, intertwining and overlapping with his viola line, and the tempo drops to a languorous, lento aside, which I will try and bring up for you here. musical and visual personas shared, as we can see here. So this is actually two people. You can see here, this is Blondelin here and Scaramouche. So this is a still from later on in the production. At this stage, they both inhabit the feminine subject position as spectacle. Scaramouche through his performance and his conspicuous deformity, and Blondelin through both her dancing and her gender. From this perspective, Scaramouche can be read as being a part of Blondelin, split off and projected into physical form. It is here that the idea of splitting becomes pertinent, the notion that an individual divides an object into good and bad, and splits the bad parts from themselves, projecting them to another. According to Klein, the frustrating and persecuting object is not only kept apart from the good one, but its very existence is denied, end quote. The untamed, grotesque sexuality represented by Scaramouche is abhorrent to a Blondelin concerned with abstract social conventions, and there can be no integration between them. Ironically, perhaps, Blondelin's fragmented ego may be the cause of the rift seen between her and Lenon. We cannot maintain rigidity in the unconscious without the present cathexis, and the relationship is not what was fantasized, for it is founded on a denial of the self. Lenon, whose existence echoes only half of Blondelin's true self, may never share her inner world to a depth that satisfies her. Sibelius' music suggests that their relationship is respectful, but physically superficial. Hence she is pulled to Scaramouche, although she cannot place the origin of this attraction. What Blondelin represses are feelings that threaten her very being, and these are forced into confrontation with Scaramouche and his music, something that is, for Blondelin, a terrifying act. When she's presented with the choice to succumb to Scaramouche or to stay with Lenon, she panics and murders Scaramouche, fearing retribution from Lenon, representing, in other terms, the societal constraint to which he wishes to conform. In Kleinian terms, it is at this point that her, quote, persecutory fear is too strong, and the flight to the idealized object becomes excessive, end quote. Splitting is a form of defense, a coping mechanism, and to be stripped of one's defenses is to invite the same feelings of threatened psychic organization. In order to maintain the illusion of the idealized object, she literally kills off that aspect of herself she recognizes as bad. However, to maintain something resembling a healthy ego development, both good and bad aspects of the self must be recognized in order to maintain a flexibility between the depressive and paranoid schizoid states, mainly seeing like the whole object versus the fragmentation of it, and the ability to move between the two as we face the various challenges that it brings. To entirely deny the bad object and the attendant painful situations that accompany it is, according to Klein, the unconscious equal to annihilation by the destructive impulse, resulting here in the loss of selfhood and self-identity entirely. In killing Scaramouche, Blondelin murders an aspect of herself and is left in this all-consuming state of annihilation. She's devoid of capacity for the depressive position, yet too unhappy inhabiting the paranoid schizoid, and Knudsen's text and Sibelius' score portray this quite literally, with Blondelin dancing herself to death. Klein states that the weakened ego becomes incapable of assimilating its internal objects, and this leads to the feeling that it is ruled by them. Blondelin is ruled, both body and mind, by Scaramouche and his music, even after she has murdered him, and it is this that causes her death. The complex identity interactions at play in Scaramouche are, I suspect, at least part of the reason that Sibelius not only continued work on the pantomime, but produced some of his most astonishing and enigmatic music for it. Reviewers commented that in the finished composer's later works, Scaramouche occupies a very prominent place. Quote, here Sibelius' melodic inspiration flows, his imaginative power is undiminished, end quote. Another wrote that this music can be counted as the most inspired Sibelius ever wrote. They suggested that the expressionistic mystic atmosphere of the text is what captivated Sibelius, and certainly its symbolist attitude is in keeping with other dramas that Sibelius wrote before. But this, I think, is only the surface. Although one of his most noticeably explicit, this is not the first of Sibelius' scores to deal with sex and masculine identities that lie outside the heroic ideal. As Peter Franklin notes, Kulava problematizes the hero's masculinity in the most disturbing manner possible. And Stephen Dow's analysis of the Lemminkainen legends shows the heroic protagonist to be emasculated, ultimately falling short of the type of masculinity implied by the Beethovenian heroic paradigm. Scaramouche presents the marginalized musician in a form that might well have appealed to Sibelius, who so often referred to himself as a persecuted artist in his diary, misunderstood by people who he refers to as Philistines. Scaramouche was written at a time when Sibelius was at his most insecure, trying to situate himself musically against such characters as Stravinsky, Schoenberg, Debussy, and Ravel. His diary entries reveal that the international position of his music was a particular concern while writing Scaramouche, and the commission to write a piece around the fragile masculinity sustained by art was no doubt timely for Sibelius. I suggest that Sibelius saw something of himself in Scaramouche, but also in Blondelaine. Tommy Mekkeler has argued for seeing Sibelius as a man of two halves, calling him both the homme naturel and the homme civil. According to Mekkeler, Sibelius was not only someone who could establish contact with nature, and who saw through the trap of the supposedly unspoiled nature of the mythological, but was also an elegant homme civil who moved about big cities like a fish in water. In this dualism, we can see parallels with the passionate Scaramouche and the civilized Blondelaine, two aspects here of the same person. And it is art, music and dance, that brings the two together, and without it, they both perish. As Mekkeler states, in his heart of hearts, Sibelius probably indeed believed that a synthesis of nature and civilization was possible through art, but Sibelius was ultimately paralyzed by self-criticism. Likewise in Scaramouche, the overwhelming climax of the Bolero hints at this sort of synthesis, but it is denied and falls into silence. Later on, Scaramouche's death is remarkably marked not by melodramatic chords, but also by silence. In Scaramouche, Sibelius seems to predict the silence of the ardent path, indicating that silence can be the only outcome when creative life is controlled by anxieties about the judgments of others. Scaramouche feeds into the key concerns of early 20th century theatre, exploring multiple forms of communication and engaging with the fascination for reworked commedia dell'arte figures, compare, for example, Stravinsky's Pulcinella and Schoenberg's Pierre et Lunaire. But on a more personal level, it brings together many of the themes that preoccupied Sibelius throughout his life, attempting to find his place as a musician, both socially and artistically. He wrote in his diary on the 27th of June 1913, "Work today on the pantomime, had the feeling of being a genius. Quite so, glorious ego. Philistines draw you down enough. It is their Philistinic custom. What on earth to do?" Scaramouche provided Sibelius with the means to explore this question, stating the consequences of the Philistinic outlook he so feared and despised. Dramatic works such as this are instrumental in understanding Sibelius' aesthetic synthesis, and it is through them